Threats of corporate greed and digital sabotage had been replaced by a more existential crisis, a mental blight where humanity was losing its capacity for empathy. The apostle seeds, for all their biological wonder, were struggling to combat a sickness of the spirit. Helena, now in the twilight of her own career, called for a global resonant event. She asked everyone on the planet to simply stop for 1 minute at the same time and listen to the hum of the earth. As the minute began, Helena stood in the center of the living cathedral. She felt the pulse of the anchor, the silence from the well, and the collective heartbeat of billions. The indigo-gold vines began to glow with a blinding white light. The apathy broke. It was like a dam bursting. Across the globe, people were flooded with the memories of those they loved, the scent of their own great slaughters, and the realization that they were all part of the same stone. The miracle of St. Vincent's had finally gone universal. It was no longer a village mystery or a scientific discovery. It was the baseline of human existence. Chapter 31. Helena spent her final days in the laboratory. She felt a profound sense of completion. She looked at the photograph of Sister Helena and Elias, the letters of Sam and Ruth, and the goggles of Bonafé. She sat at the desk and wrote her final log entry. Chemistry is the language of the physical. Faith is the language of the spiritual. Resonance is the bridge. We have crossed the bridge. The lab is no longer necessary, for the world is now the sanctuary. She passed away as the bells of St. Vincent's tolled her home. She was buried beside her parents, under a canopy of indigo gold petals that never seemed to fall. Chapter 32. The Age of the Living Cathedral. 100 years had passed since Helena Gillespie joined the ancestors. St. Vincent's was no longer a hidden jewel of the colony. It had become the spiritual and scientific capital of a planet that had finally learned to breathe. The age of resonance was in full bloom. The apostle flowers had spread to every continent, adapted by the global broadcast of the song. But as humanity grew accustomed to peace, a new kind of forgetting began to settle in. The younger generations began to treat the miracle as a utility, a given, like gravity or the air they breathed. In the year 600 of St. Vincent, a young archivist named Clara was tasked with organizing the founder's vault. Clara was a dreamer, often found staring at the ancient, scratched goggles that once belonged to the legendary Sister. They're just artifacts, Clara, her mentor, an elderly scholar, would say. The real power is in the global resonance network. We don't need the old retorts and glass tubes anymore. But Clara felt a discordant note in the air. The global hum, once a pure and vibrant melody, was starting to sound thin, mechanical. It was as if the pure intent Helena had found in the well was being diluted by the sheer noise of a busy, efficient world. Chapter 33. The Whispering Stones. The crisis began when the anchor stone in the north cloister stopped glowing. It didn't flicker or fade. It simply turned cold, a silent lump of translucent rock. Within hours, the global medicinal harvest began to wither. The indigo gold flowers, once the shield against all disease, turned a dull, sickly gray. Panic, a ghost humanity thought it had exorcised, returned to the streets of great slaughter. The scientists of the Institute scrambled to recalibrate the broadcast, but nothing worked. The song was there, but the earth was no longer listening. Clara, guided by a strange intuition, returned to the founder's vault. She put on Sister Boniface's goggles. They were heavy, smelling of old leather and ozone. As she looked through the lenses, the world changed. She didn't see the sleek, modern monitors. She saw the ley lines of the earth, the invisible veins of energy that Sister Helena, the archaeologist, had once mapped. She noticed a fracture in the resonance. It wasn't a technical failure. It was a Stoneheart problem. Somewhere, deep within the foundations, a secret had been kept, a secret that demanded to be heard. Chapter 34. The Return of the Eye. Clara followed the energy lines to the ruins of the old chapel in the woods, the place where Boniface had found the deed of gift centuries ago. There, standing in the shadows of the crumbling stones, was a figure that shouldn't exist. It was a man dressed in the simple garb of a guardian, the weeping eyes symbol embroidered on his chest. He introduced himself as Thomas, a descendant of the Julian who had once tested Helena. The seeds were a gift, archivist, Thomas said, his voice like the rustle of leaves. But humanity has turned the gift into a machine. You have forgotten that resonance requires a heartbeat, not just an algorithm. You have silenced the earth with your efficiency. He handed Clara a single, black seed, the seed of the void. It was the antithesis of the apostle seeds, a dormant strain that only bloomed when the human spirit was at its lowest. The anchor is not broken, Thomas explained. It is hiding. It is waiting for someone to prove that the heart of St. Vincent still knows how to weep for the world, not just calculate its survival. Chapter 35. The Infinite Harvest. Clara returned to the North Cloister. The townspeople were gathered there, their faces filled with a desperate, calculating fear. Clara stood before the cold anchor stone. She didn't offer a scientific formula. She didn't broadcast a song. Instead, she spoke of the people. She spoke of Ruth Penny's sharp London wit, of Sam Gillespie's quiet devotion, and of the Earl who was willing to lose everything to save a group of nuns. She spoke of Sister Boniface, who saw God in the veins of a leaf, and the reaction in a test tube. As she spoke, she allowed herself to feel the weight of the 500 years, the tragedies, the small acts of mercy, the romances that had anchored the miracle. She wept, not for the loss of the medicine, but for the loss of the memory. Her tears fell onto the cold anchor stone. The stone pulsed. A low, deep vibration shook the foundations of great slaughter. It wasn't the mechanical hum of the broadcast. It was a warm, irregular thrum. The indigo gold vines began to glow again. But this time, the light was different. It wasn't just gold. It was a vibrant, living green. The infinite harvest had begun. The miracle was no longer a utility. It was a relationship. The apostle flowers bloomed with a new strength, their roots digging deeper into the limestone, binding the town and the convent into a singular, eternal entity. Great slaughter was safe, but more importantly, it was awake. Chapter 36. The Stellar Diaspora. By the year 1000 of the Great Covenant, humanity had outgrown its cradle. The stars, once distant pinpricks of light, were now neighbors. But the lesson of St. Vincent's remained the central axis of this galactic civilization. In the vast silence of space, floating gardens known as Vincentine arcs carried the indigo gold seeds to the farthest reaches of the galaxy. These weren't mere space stations. They were living monasteries of light, humming with the resonance of the cosmos. A young navigator named Orion, serving on the Ark F, stood by the viewport as they approached a desolate, dying planet in the Andromeda sector. The planet was a gray husk, its spirit crushed by centuries of industrial war. The resonance is faint here, Orion whispered to his commander, a stooped figure who wore a simple habit beneath her command uniform. Then we must bring the song closer, Orion, she replied. She reached into a small, velvet-lined box and pulled out a single, glowing seed, the direct descendant of the very seeds Sister Helena had found in the desert. As they released the resonant mists over the planet, Orion didn't see a chemical reaction. He saw the return of hope. The planet didn't just turn green, it began to hum. It was the same low, deep thrum that Sister Boniface had first recorded in her laboratory. The stone heart was now a galaxy heart. The diaspora of light ensured that no world would ever be truly alone again. Chapter 37. The Eternal Warden. Deep within the ruins of the original St. Vincent's, back on Earth now, untouchable, Farista's single light still burned in the vault. It wasn't a fire, but the original anchor stone, now a beacon that connected all the arcs across the cosmos. Standing before it was a presence that felt older than the stones themselves. It was the spirit of the Covenant, a collective memory of every soul who had ever protected the secret. Boniface's laughter, Ruth's ink, Sam's steady hand, and Helena Songdi were all here, woven into the very fabric of the light. A small child from the village, which had survived the millennia as a place of pure, simple living, wandered into the forest. He found the light and didn't feel afraid. He knelt and touched the stone. "Who are you?" the child asked the light. "I am the truth that hides in plain sight," the light whispered back. "I am the home you never left." The child smiled and began to hum, and somewhere, on the other side of the galaxy, 1,000 worlds hummed back in perfect, eternal harmony. Chapter 38. The Weaving of the Tapestry. As the cosmos thrummed with the shared melody of 1,000,000,000 worlds, a final realization began to settle into the collective consciousness of the St. Vincent lineage. It wasn't enough for the universe to hum. It had to understand the threads that made the tapestry. Deep within the resonant archive, Orion now, an elder statesman of the stellar diaspora. It wasn't digital, but a crystallized moment of pure emotion, preserved through the very resonance they all lived by. When he activated it, he wasn't looking at a screen. He was there. He felt the damp mist of a Cotswold morning in 1965. He smelled the ozone of Sister Boniface's laboratory. He heard the scratch of Ruth Penny's pen and felt the quiet strength of Sam Gillespie's presence. They aren't just figures from history.